Well, it looks today as if Jill Stein's quixotic quest for money and for fame may be over. But even if it is, in all reality, we'll still see the mainstream media promoting it, won't we? You know, we're going to take a look tonight at her tactic, which is basically to deny Trump a victory in the Electoral College. But we're also going to look at the long-term strategy of Soros and those who are trying to shut down the Electoral College. What does that mean? And of course, we had good things to say about Jill Stein back in June when she was pointing out that Hillary Clinton was a criminal with the email scandal that was happening at the same time. At that time, we had the Libertarian Party ticket still heaping praise on Hillary Clinton. But Jill Stein, back in the middle of June, had this to say. She said the investigation of Hillary Clinton's email scandal should go forward. She said this is a sort of typical Hillary Clinton, to do things that are not legal, to say that they are, and then try to cover them up. Yeah, and so now this criminal is the one that Jill Stein is trying to get into office. But of course, there's much more behind that. It's really more about Jill Stein. It's about her raising money for the recounts. It's about the attention she's getting. As the Washington Examiner pointed out, Stein has raised more money for the recounts than she did for her own campaign. They said that she raised $3.5 million to campaign for the White House, but she has raised $6.5 million to try to pay for recounts in 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, the interesting thing about this is she's also getting a lot of press coverage. They say the networks are giving her 12 times the amount of coverage of her entire campaign, as well as the amount of money that she's getting. Newsbusters via Drudge reported when Jill Stein was a Green Party candidate for U.S. president, the networks only gave her 36 seconds of coverage, but now she's gotten 7 minutes and 26 seconds of coverage in just 4 days from NBC. Meanwhile, she's run into some big bumps on the road to getting this done. She had a major setback today, earlier in the day, when Wisconsin, the first state that she moved to have this recount done, rejected the idea that they were going to do hand counts. And of course, hand counts would be the way that she would delay this to keep Wisconsin and these other 3 states from sending electors to the Electoral College. The Wisconsin Elections Commission set a timetable today, Monday, for a recount of the presidential election, but they rejected a request to require a count by hand made by Green Party candidate Jill Stein, who quickly responded that she would sue. As a matter of fact, I have her complaint here in front of me, and if you look at it, it's based on essentially a couple of articles by mainstream media, by Wired, New York Times. These were articles that were in August of 2016, but then she did not put in any of the articles by the same sources that said, no, don't worry, we're not really concerned about hacking. She said that hackers infiltrated the email system of the Democrat National Committee. Therefore, according to Jill Stein, they would be hacking the machines as well. And of course, that is a clear and present danger. And we've warned people about that. We've also told people that it is a major problem that we don't have a way to monitor these electronic voting machines. And yet, Jill Stein had nothing to say about that in the lead up to the election. She was silent, just as she is now silent about voter fraud. Now she pretends to care about election fraud. Moving on with the other setback that she had today. In Pennsylvania, it looks like she's missed the deadline. So it looks like she may not get Pennsylvania at all. According to Wanda Murin, spokesman for the Pennsylvania Department of State, the Philadelphia Inquirer reported today that the deadline for voter-initiated recount was Monday, November 21st. And as you remember at the beginning of the broadcast, I said today's date, Jill, is November the 28th. You missed it by a full week, not even close. You know, maybe when we talk about Jill Stein being the green candidate, maybe what they really mean by this is not that she's an environmentalist, but that she's so green she doesn't know what's going on. She has now become even more irrelevant in this post-election process than she was during the election process. They point out that although Trump beat Clinton in Pennsylvania, this is a feat that was not accomplished by Republicans since Ronald Reagan in 1988, and it wasn't even close, they said. 70,000 votes. That's a significant margin that will be very hard to overcome in a recount. But here's what the real strategy is. Now, this is an article from the American Thinker that aired over the weekend. She's challenging Donald Trump in 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now, right now, Donald Trump has 306 Electoral College votes based on the states that he won. What she's trying to do is take away 10 in Wisconsin, 16 in Michigan, and 20 in Pennsylvania. That'd be 46 that she would take away. That would take him from 306 down to 260. If they were able to hold up this recount beyond December the 19th, which is when the Electoral College meets. That is the tactic that they're trying to accomplish here. So that would take him below the level of 270, which he would need to win the Electoral College. The problem is, since she missed this deadline by a full week in Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania is now off the charts here, and now it goes back in the Donald Trump column. So even if she were successful in delaying Wisconsin and Michigan from participating in the Electoral College, Donald Trump would now have 280, which is more than he needs with the 270. And as I pointed out over the weekend, when I tweeted out on this, I said, really, the purpose of this is to de-legitimize the election, not just for Trump, but for the Electoral College, and to also forward Soros's purpose of having a type of color revolution here. What George Soros has done over and over through the former Soviet Union states, he has started with an election that they said was not legitimate. So they first de-legitimized the election. Then they portray the winner as someone who is authoritarian, and they energize the college students saying this is an illegitimate election by an authoritarian, as we've seen them portray Donald Trump as a racist and a Nazi over and over again. That's become the irrational meme that they throw at us. So if they do that, and they do those two things, then they think that they can energize the college students, as we've seen done throughout former Soviet Union states. That is truly the long-term strategy of this. But the other part of this is to also overthrow the Electoral College. And you need to understand just how important the Electoral College is. The other thing I tweeted out over this weekend is that it is a firewall to the corruption and the concentration of power in just a few big states. Now, underlining that is what Donald Trump said in his tweets. He said, hey, if we didn't have the Electoral College, I would have campaigned differently. And this is what he said. It would have been much easier for me to win so-called popular vote than the Electoral College. He said, I would have focused on 3 or 4 big states rather than the 15-state strategy that he employed against Clinton. Think about that. He had a 15-state strategy. So that means that only 30% of the states were part of the strategy to win. That's all you really need. Now, if you hadn't had the Electoral College, you would have gone to 4 states, only 8% of the states. We have to understand what a problem that would be. Now, the Rolling Stone magazine says that the problem with the Electoral College is that it rigged the election for Donald Trump. No, he played by the system, and now they're trying to move the goalpost. But it is a good system. The founders created the system for 2 reasons. Number one, it was the states that created the federal government, not the other way around. And they were seen as equals to the federal government and as checks to the federal government. But when I talked about it being a firewall, you have to understand that if we allow only 3 or 4 large states to determine the presidency, then you're going to have cities like New York and Illinois and LA where you have rampant voter fraud as well as election fraud. They will pad the totals in those populous states. Just in New York State alone, New York City alone, you have nearly the amount of people that you have in North Carolina statewide. You have like 3 or 4 times what you have in South Carolina, for example. So we will basically have just a couple of large cities that will determine the election for the rest of us. And when we go back and look at the structure of this, understand that just as we had sovereign nations unfortunately create the United Nations, and we are not yet subject to a hierarchical situation where the United Nations is dictating it to us as the federal government does, the people who were pushing against the federal government getting more power, the anti-federalists, were very concerned that what we would have is a pyramid structure with the federal government at the top, a consolidation, a concentration of power at that central area. If we were to have that, for example, with the UN, and if we were to move from a system where we have individual countries or states having their own individual votes to a system where we had a worldwide democratic election, what would happen? We would have China and India deciding everything for us. And we would have to rely on the Chinese government to honestly report those vote totals to us. See, that's the problem with doing away with the Electoral College. But that is a big part of the strategic push right now. We see publications, mainstream media, just railing about the Electoral College as we see Hillary Clinton's vote totals continue to climb and climb and climb. It was even reported in the Daily Mail. Well, her vote totals now are currently over 2 million. We'll give her another week and they'll add another million to it. And that is coming from Democratic strongholds. That is why we have the Electoral College as a firewall against that kind of corruption and concentration of power. Meanwhile, we have George Soros, as we see as Hillary Clinton getting involved in the idea that they're going to have a recount in Wisconsin. She said, yeah, we're going to join in this over the weekend. Let's take a look, as Breitbart does, back at George Soros's financed lawyer, Mark Elias, who was working with Hillary Clinton. As they point out, the lawyer representing Hillary Clinton's recount efforts recently led legal battles against state voting laws with an infusion of funding from billionaire George Soros, the usual suspects. And they point out that what he is doing is funding lawsuits in places like North Carolina, which prevent North Carolina from actually looking at photo ID of people. There is nothing racist about looking at photo ID. If there is, then we need to shut down the TSA. We need to shut down all the different grocery stores and retailers who ask to see your photo ID when you cash a check. No, we're not allowed to do that because that's racist. We need to understand, as we see in North Carolina, the push is always in a few corrupt jurisdictions within the state. For example, in North Carolina, it was in Durham, where they extended the voting hours by an hour and a half and said, we're going to extend this. And you have to understand that in North Carolina, you can show up if you simply have a name and an address and you're allowed to vote because there's no photo ID. So these types of things that they call restrictive voting laws, no, they're not restrictive voting laws if you look at somebody's ID. Meanwhile, we have Jill Stein saying that we need to shut down, we need to audit these voting machines. And she actually said, we don't have any proof. We don't have any smoking gun. We just think that that may have happened. And for that purpose, she is willing, and for her own self-aggrandizement, she is willing to throw the entire process into chaos. I have to say that in this election cycle, what I have seen from both the Libertarian Party and from the Green Party is really something that sets back the whole idea of a multi-party democracy. I, for one, have worked for a long time, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, with the Libertarian Party, trying to get multi-party democracy. I don't like the duopoly of the Republican and the Democratic Party. I would like for us to be able to have other parties that have access to the ballot in a fair way, have access to the debates in a fair way. And yet we have seen from both of these parties, the Libertarian Party and now from the Green Party, we've seen that they have essentially become whatever people have been accusing them of, and that is a distraction and a hindrance to moving this along. They're not using their access in a way that is responsible. You know, Jill Stein was right back in June when she said Hillary Clinton was a criminal. But at this point, what we need to do is we need to focus on the criminal organization that she's created, the Clinton Foundation. Because like the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, these foundations that are endowed with billions of dollars by these billionaires are going to continue a life of their own. And just as we see with George Soros's Open Society Foundation, the Hillary Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Foundation, is going to continue to steal money from people, but it's also going to continue to overthrow governments, including our own, if we don't stop it. It's going to be a perpetual instrument of these people. Today, we see that the Trump administration is going to pressure foreign governments to probe the Clinton Foundation. A source close to President-elect Donald Trump's transition team told the Post, the New York Post, that the new administration plans to pressure U.S. ambassadors that it will name to bring up the foundation with foreign governments and suggest that they probe its financial dealings. The source said Haiti and Colombia will be key diplomatic posts for this because of all the money involved. And we've talked at length about how the Clinton Foundation raped Haiti. We've done long reports about that. We've talked to people from Haiti to show that. But look at this from other states. We've had, as they point out, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Netherlands, Canada, Sweden, Ireland. All of them have given millions, they say. Well, I would say it's more like tens or more likely hundreds of millions of dollars in the aggregate to the Clintons. They say days after Hillary Clinton's election defeat, the French federal comptrollers began following a trail of tens of millions in government money that ended up in the Clinton Foundation coffers. The Australian government last week announced it would end its decade-long affiliation with the Clinton Foundation. Norway is also scaling back. See, they don't have any influence to sell. These people are on the short end of the stick. They've been selling favors, and now they've got nothing to deliver. But also we see that in China, the globalists are now looking to the Chinese to defend globalism. Isn't that interesting? As we see from this article from the LA Times, they point out China's government oversaw the worst crackdown on dissent in nearly 3 decades. The Chinese built and militarized islands in disputed waters off the South China Sea. They tightened controls over the internet. They froze out foreign firms while allowing their domestic competitors to prosper. See, that is true nationalism. That is hyper-nationalism. And it is everything that the left, that all these globalists say that they're in favor of. They all tell us that they're in favor of a free internet. They tell us that they're in favor of free trade, and yet China is the antithesis to that. However, they are the tool of the multinational corporations and the globalists. And now they turn to China to try to strategize against Trump. Now, when we come back, we're going to look at someone else that they're turning to besides China, and that is David Petraeus. A very dangerous meeting happened today. Hopefully, we can get Donald Trump's ear. You need to get his ear on social media and tell him never pick David Petraeus, and we'll tell you why after we come back from the break.
You think our information's hardcore? You think our focus is brutal? Try our nutraceuticals. Try our supplements. We've taken Brain Force and made it Brain Force Plus. Now at 20% more in the bottle and an even more hardcore formula. You owe it to yourself to get these products. They really have worked for myself, my family. They have 5-star reviews by the thousands. Secure your Brain Force Plus today at InfoWarsLife.com. Now 20% stronger. Again, InfoWarsLife.com.